You don't have to be poor for social class to be impacting your job performance. Let me tell you about my client, Camille. Her dad was a lineman, and her mom was a postal worker. That's a good living. Stable job, benefits. She wasn't poor. They weren't rich, but they weren't poor. And then Camille went to college, and then she got a white-collar job. And as soon as she walked into those spaces, something felt off. She was seen as unrefined. Things were off, and she couldn't quite name what, but she struggled to convey her ideas. Felt like there was a rule book that she was missing on what would help her advance and do well at this job, even though she was nailing everything in her job description. She didn't know how to express it because nobody else seemed to be having that problem. They all seemed to have gotten a copy of that handbook, and it wasn't the official employee handbook. And then she found me on TikTok, and some things started to click. She went to her boss and made the case to bring me in to speak at their organization. And this is where Camille found out she is not alone. I'm Dr. Anna Kalshman. I'm the leading researcher in industrial organizational psychology on social class norms at work and how they impact people and business. What my data shows you is that class is not just a money outcome. It is a culture. And that distinction matters enormously at work and happens way earlier than we think it does. It doesn't only happen once you get to the top 2%. When I talk about class at work, most people picture someone who grew up in poverty trying to navigate the corporate environment. That does happen. That is a huge class gap and a major experience, and I've worked with clients who have that. But it also happens for people who have Camille's story, maybe not to the same extent. It can be harder for people like Camille to see the class culture gap because they had enough to not be poor, but they're still struggling to understand what's going on, and they often fly under the radar, especially if they have other things that are passing in the work environment, like being white and able-bodied. Camille's parents weren't poor. They had good, stable jobs, the kind that built the American middle class. And working class culture has a lot going for it. Clear, direct communication, good work ethic, community building. You show up, you do the job, you don't make it too complicated. You take pride in your work, you do it well. If something goes wrong, you say so. There can be integrity in that, but that's not always what's rewarded when you get to the office. In white-collar world, you don't say something's wrong. You flag a potential concern. You don't ask for what you need. You build a business case for it, but it needs to be what the person you're building it for cares about, and not necessarily what the business says they care about. You don't work hard and wait to be noticed. You manage your visibility. Float ideas before formally proposing them. You get buy-in before the meeting, not always during it. None of that's written down anywhere. If your parents worked in an environment like this, you've had some guidance on how to do this. Not necessarily that you can call mom and dad and ask, although you might, but that this will be a reflection of the class values you are in. Because if you grew up in that class, this was how your family likely approached conflict. This was how your teachers in schools and how you navigated that system. The same cultural norms in a class, at home, at school, are happening in workplaces. And so it seems normal to everyone who has been in that same class, but to people who transition, it's a whole new world. Since everyone else seems to think it's normal, even if they're also transitioning because they're afraid to say it, real damage can happen. You hit that invisible class ceiling. When you hit this ceiling, the system will tell you that you are the problem, that this is just the way things are, that this is just professionalism. That's not good for the business either, because then you have these people who are competent, hardworking, care a lot, aren't making it through your promotion pipeline. And that's how we sold it to Camille's boss. There is a customer benefit to having people in leadership and in the corporate spaces who understand the boots on the ground work, especially in industries that have people who make these transitions relatively frequently. Places like tech, where you might have someone who's self-taught in coding who then moved up into leadership decisions. Manufacturing, somebody who was in the auto shop and did an amazing job, and now you want them to run the auto shop. People who are in retail, who've been on the shop floor, who understand the difficulties of working with customers, who know what stocking and restocking looks like, who understand the complexity and multiple demands on their time, then moving up and making business decisions. But it's not an individual failing of that worker. It is a class culture clash. And it shows up as that person being told they lack executive presence. They're not professional. They need to read the room better. They need to be more refined. But that is only helpful feedback to that person if then they have the coaching and support to know how to make that tangible. Otherwise, it becomes an internalized injury, blaming themselves for a system problem. And that's not even good business either, because when the promotion pipeline doesn't have a pipeline, when you get people in leadership who don't understand the business, when you have workers who don't see anyone like them being promoted, so why would they stay and invest in your business? That doesn't do well on your ROI long term. Because you have people like Camille who are hardworking, competent, the kind of person who figures things out, but struggling to find something that she can't quite decode because nobody's talking about it. How does her colleague's half-formed idea get pulled and not her well-thought-out proposal? Why is she walking out of conversations feeling like she said something wrong even though she answered the questions that were asked of her? Why does she keep getting feedback about presence and communication, and her actual work is excellent? It's not random. Those are class cultural signals. And the reason she doesn't know that is because nobody's named them to her. Until she found my TikTok. And she saw my decade of research naming the 8 unwritten rules of work that are related to social class. She goes to her boss and said, "Hey, I think we need to talk about this. I think our clients would be very interested in this because they work with manufacturing, so they have a lot of people who go up that ladder or are trying to, and they hit that class ceiling pretty quick." And he agreed. So they had me come in for a keynote and a workshop. We didn't keep it fluffy. We kept it silly, but not fluffy. We named the phenomenon for the whole room, made it clear it's not just Camille. It's happening to a lot of people, but Camille opened the workshop with telling her story, and you could instantly see faces in the room going, "Oh shit, that's me." This is what organizations miss. The class culture gap does not just impact that person. It impacts the whole organization. And managers don't know that direct communicators are not necessarily challenging them or being aggressive. It is a class culture clash. They mislabel employees. When they don't know how to coach that employee on why an investor or another stakeholder might be offended by that and what to do instead in a way that feels authentic, does so in a way that tells them nothing's wrong with you. This is just a different culture and here are skills that you know. You lose people. You piss off customers. You lose great employees who have maybe years of knowledge of your institution and who have built social capital and respect among other workers. Telling someone, "Hey, here's what I think is going on," and it's a clash, not a personal failing, not a, "oh, you yucky poor person," has a completely different reaction. Believe that? We made it very tangible. I provided frameworks. We did exercises on how to provide feedback to people in a way that is humanizing and class conscious and isn't bound in the assumption of there's one right way to do things, and if you don't do it this way, then you're just not a culture fit. Trained managers on how to recognize and address class culture gaps in their organization. Not to lower the bar, but to make these unwritten rules visible so that everyone in the room could actually use them and so that all the employees impacted by them can feel seen and they don't have to scroll on TikTok to find someone else to figure out what's going on. The organization said it was the most impactful keynote they've ever had and invited me back for double the time the following year. Also hired me to do executive coaching. And this is how you know the unwritten rules have a real impact. People see results when they're not talking around a problem they don't know is there. When they have the ability to communicate about a very real feeling that has a very tangible impact, but has not been named. And of course, I can't take full credit because that Camille saw something, saw herself, saw the impact, and could go to her boss and say, "Hey, this is me, and I think it's happening to a lot of people here too," and that he was open to it. Says a lot about there is a healthy culture there. They just needed the language and a skill set for it. Because there are also many people in Camille's shoes who know they cannot out themselves to their boss like that. So if you're a leader and you're seeing this, don't wait for your employees to tell you something that they may be afraid to do. My first research study from my master's found that even white men from low-income backgrounds in America are afraid to disclose a poor background even if they're no longer poor, even if they're middle class. This stuff is heavily stigmatized. The good thing we know about work on class in universities is that when you make things clear for first-generation students, you don't take away from continuing generation students. They still benefit from clarity. The same is true in organizations. You're not prioritizing your working class employees over your middle class ones or your professional ones. You're giving them a shared framework to interact with each other to get the job done better so they can focus their energy on other things. So if you're watching this and you are a Camille, maybe send this to your boss, see what happens. You can't because of the stigma. May the algorithm gods be in our favor.